Hi, I'm Jennifer Cabani, editor of TheCollegeFix, and I'm here with Heather McDonald, one of the smartest women in America and author of the new best-selling When Race Trumps Merit. And it's just an honor to have you. Thanks, Heather, for taking some time to talk about your great new book.
Well, thank you so much, Jennifer. And you obviously haven't read it that closely if you identify me as a woman, because it should be obvious that I'm not particularly female identified, but that's all right. You could.
Yes, I know exactly. Well,
purposes.
you get in real deep on this thing, and you throw no punches, or you don't hesitate to throw punches and really tell it like it is. You're bold and you're brave and you're blunt, and that's what I really like about the book, is that it just gives it to you straight. And what I told you, I describe it as almost like it's a great book, but it's so depressing. It's like a gut punch. Because essentially what you're detailing in here, what you're chronicling, is like the slow death of America. And essentially it's civilizational suicide. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yes, it is. We have embraced this phony narrative that everything about America today is white supremacist. And if there is any racial disparity in any meritocratic institution, it is by definition the result of racism. And so on that fiction, we are going around tearing down the meritocratic standards that are said to be racist and that are producing these racial disparities. So in science, we have the leaders of major scientific journals like Nature or the Journal of American Medicine declaring that medicine is racist, science is racist, because we don't have 13% Black neurologists in Alzheimer's labs or 13% Black oncologists in cancer labs. We have medical schools lowering their standards, not just of admissions, but the very medical licensing exam now is changing its standards, going from the step one of the licensing exam is going from a graded basis to pass fail, which is highly inadequate to be able to test whether medical students are absorbing the knowledge they need, simply because Black students, medical students, don't do as well on part one of the licensing exam. And so standards are being torn down. It will impede our scientific progress, our medical progress. We see the same thing happening sort of in reverse in the criminal law system. If TheCollegeFix readers are sort of scratching their heads and saying, what the heck has been going on with policing and prosecution since the George Floyd race riots? Why are these George Soros prosecutors refusing to prosecute cases of trespass, disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, shoplifting, looting, theft, attacks on officers? It's all because those laws have a disparate impact on Blacks. And we have decided that we would rather not enforce the law and send criminals back on the streets to prey on the innocent again than enforce the law in a colorblind, constitutional, neutral manner and have a disparate impact on Blacks. That is another recipe for civilizational decline.
Yeah. And part of your book actually has, what struck me was there was about 5 consecutive pages of where you just write headline after headline after headline of young Black children gunned down and killed in urban violence. And yet it doesn't seem like the progressives care about those young lives. They only care about the 0.00001% of unarmed Black men that are killed by police officers. And so you got to wonder, is there a cognitive dissonance here? I mean, even in Chicago, where so much of this violence is taking place, they just elected somebody who's even more liberal than the last mayor. So what is going on? Like, why don't they wake up and care about the things that are really destroying their communities?
It's astonishing, Jennifer, and you're absolutely right to point to the Brandon Johnson runoff election in Chicago, that frankly undercuts a conservative safe harbor, which is that, all of this anti-police rhetoric and policymaking is simply the result of white elites that don't live with crime. That's not the case. I mean, I have made a point of giving voice to those law-abiding, good Black residents of high crime neighborhoods who do want more police and who beg for police protection from the kids that are hanging out on corners fighting and the drug dealers. And they even want, I smell marijuana in my hallway in my apartment. Why can't you do something about it? I mean, these are real law and order types. Nevertheless, it is the case that Black activists and a large portion of the Black community itself would rather embrace the anti-cop Black victimology narrative and put up with these drive-by shootings that are leading to a homicide death rate that is unbelievable. The Journal of American Medicine published a study of 4 American cities in what they called the first 18 months after the pandemic. Well, I translate that as the 18 months after the George Floyd race riots, because it was the George Floyd race riots that resulted in the crime surge and the depolicing, not pandemic lockdowns. That is an utter fiction. But in these 4 cities, Black juveniles died of gun homicide at 100 times the rate of white juveniles. But Black activists and a significant portion of the Black community would rather put up with that than say, you know what, we need more law enforcement and we need to get criminals outside of our midst. That having been said, the fiction that the police are the problem and the turning of the eyes away from inner city dysfunction is absolutely a malady and a neurosis and a psychosis of mainstream America. We would rather blame ourselves for phantom racism and concoct a whole series of bizarre lies like white supremacists are the biggest domestic terror threat in the country, or, you know, whites are the ones committing all these anti-Asian hate crimes, or whites put Blacks at threat of their lives every single day when they step out of their street. We would rather live by those lies than be honest about the inner city cultural pathologies that are leading to the death by homicide rate and the equally astronomical homicide commission rate. And it's all about race and disparate impact.
Yeah. Well, you do a great job of chronicling anecdotes along with data and statistics to paint a picture of, like you said, just they're living by lies in these urban cities, and unfortunately, a lot of their own community are paying the price. But you are a voice for the voiceless, because there are a lot of Black Americans who want the police there to protect their families, to protect their houses, and frankly, small business owners too that suffer. I mean, you know, some Black-owned small businesses were burned, you know, in June 2020. And I mean, how is that fair? So I'm glad you give a voice to the voiceless on that and expose, you know, this neuroses. And well, another section of your book.
Let me just say, I mean, it just, you know, it occurred to me like 3 weeks ago, if you were starting from scratch and you thought about, okay, I'm a civil rights activist, I'm starting from scratch, I have a choice here. I can advocate on behalf of Black criminals, or I can advocate on behalf of Black victims. It's not intuitively obvious to me that they would have chosen the Black criminals, but that is how it works. They advocate on behalf of Black criminals. That's why you cannot get extended sentences for illegal gun possession in many state legislatures, because the Black caucus opposes it, because that will send more Blacks to prison. So it is really astonishing. And if white conservatives ever stop caring about Black victims, then nobody's going to care, because the only people that talk about the post-George Floyd race riot crime increase is Fox News and the New York Post. And you know, to the extent the TheCollegeFix ever covers that, but basically they're the only ones that talk about it. Everybody else turns their eyes away because they do not want to talk about Black criminals. Anyway, enough with that.
I mean, somebody's got to defend. I mean, I try to retweet every time I see a story about, you know, a young Black child being gunned down in senseless violence. I try to retweet that because I just want to, I care about all deaths. Yeah. And I just wish that more people did. And, you know, like the civil rights activists who should. Anyways, so you talk a lot about law and crime in your book. And then you have another section, as you mentioned, when we first started off, about, you know, the degradation of our medical schools. And I really appreciated a couple of the anecdotes that you had in there. You had one anecdote where they reduced, basically they want to broaden the pool for this top cancer award, right? So the best scientists in the nation who are researching, you know, a cure for cancer, this is the best of the best. And apparently the people they were giving it to every year, it wasn't, you know, there weren't enough scientists of color. So they had to like expand the field. And you make the point, like, this is our lives at stake. This is, a cure for cancer at stake. But again, this is a situation where mediocrity trumps meritocracy, because we all want to feel good about ourselves. So, and again, as you mentioned, reducing the amount of standards needed for the MCAT, blaming everything on racism as opposed to diet, exercise, and even genetics. Now they're scared to research, as you point out, a couple anecdotes about genetic research being shunned because, God forbid, it shows some genetic differences. So you summarize all that. There's tons of anecdotes, data, read the book, it's all in there. But at the end of the day is, these policies are killing people and are going to kill people. So liberal policies are already killing people with gun violence. Now they're going to come in medical field and people are going to die as a result. I mean, is it hyperbole? Is that exaggeration? Or literally, is this going to lead to death?
Well, there's a very high risk that it will, Jennifer, because we are lowering standards, and we are, there's a policy implication, and then there's sort of a pure ontology implication that we should not live by lies. It is not the case that American institutions are discriminating against Blacks or Hispanics today. They once did, and it's hard to think that we have changed that much. And our past was truly a betrayal. It was heartbreaking. It undercuts every facile paean to American belief in equality and independence and rugged entrepreneurial individualism. Because all of those liberties that we were embracing, we were denying Blacks. That went on for a very long time. And that it's heartbreaking. But I can simultaneously acknowledge that. And I can even say that I do think that some conservative histories insufficiently note that. They are somewhat of a whitewash. At the same time, I am not going to give one iota of ground on my assertion that today our reality is Black privilege, not white privilege. There is not an institution in America that is not trying to admit, hire, promote as many Blacks as possible, giving Blacks an enormous advantage over heterosexual white males. They are admitting Blacks with qualifications that would be automatically disqualifying if presented by whites or Asians. Will this affect medical competence? How can it not? We are pushing people into positions with lower standards. If we're not utter nihilists, and if we're not prepared to say, let's get rid of all standards of competence and just select everybody on a lottery, if we do believe that medical licensing exams test something useful, if we're willing to have these vast different standards and promote people simply on the basis of race who would never get promoted if they were of the wrong race, I don't see how that can't end up risking medical negligence and malpractice. It is certainly going to slow down our medical progress, and that will result in not curing lives, because you have the medical funding agencies of the federal government now saying what they care about most is the diversity of a research lab, not whether the scientists working there are the most qualified. As you say, this is asking for mediocrity. The way civilizations advance is by incentivizing and pursuing excellence and celebrating excellence. Now you can't use the word excellence without appending to it inclusive excellence. Mm-hmm. And that is a code word for the destruction of meritocracy. Excellence is excellence,
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not inclusive. It's not inclusive. I should not be part of a mathematics lab, a mathematics faculty, a science lab. I should be excluded from that. That's perfectly appropriate. Anybody that is not competent should be excluded. We do not look to science for equity. That's not its value added. Its value added is knowledge creation. But right now, America is on a war against excellence and achievement. And it is instead pursuing mediocrity and failure.
Yeah. And it's something that, of course, we've seen over the decades with the dumbing down of America and the soft bigotry of low expectations. But as your book points out, it went into overdrive, hyperdrive after the death of George Floyd and the riots that followed. So we're really seeing a hyper expansion of these kind of policies. But there, and finally, I do want to wrap up by mentioning a section of the book that I think and I know is near and dear to your heart and is often kind of overlooked. But that is the attack on culture and the arts, our museums, our operas, our concert halls, just you make an argument in there for objective beauty and why it's important for humanity, and what's happening to the notion of objective beauty and objective excellence in the culture and the arts. So I want to give you a final word to explain to our audience, what's going on and why it's important.
Well, it's important on an individual basis because it allows individuals to escape the narrow confines of their existence and their consciousness and enter minds that are far more perceptive and understanding, to enter the past, to understand different ways of human beings have what have they've experienced, what have they lived, radical different value systems that are the very fact that they're different from ours are why we should be interested in them. Instead, what we're doing now is saying, well, if this book represents sex relations that are not absolutely up to date, I feel oppressed by it and I shouldn't read it, and especially if it's written by a white male. That is the most ignorant, self-defeating attitude towards the outer world and the extraordinary universe of human experience that I can imagine. But the leaders of our arts institutions have themselves been turned into absolute whimpering, cowering neurotics in the wake of the George Floyd hysteria. And they're going around, whether it's leaders of art museums or classical music organizations or theater troupes, dance troupes, declaring the traditions that it is their privilege to oversee and curate racist simply because they're European. And so by definition, demographically, those traditions are Caucasian. That doesn't make them racist. But some of the extent to which these arts leaders will go in order to prove their anti-racist bona fides are extraordinary. I write about a art exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York that makes the counterfactual, counterintuitive argument that abolitionist art that is against slavery, that is trying to move its viewers into moral outrage against the practice of enslaving, in this case, Black Africans, that art, if created by white artists, is in fact white supremacist and is in fact making the argument that the natural condition of Blacks is to be enslaved. And in order to make that argument, the Metropolitan Museum of Art mounted a show that turned on every single convention of Western art, most preposterously claiming that if an artist portrays a Black woman in partial nudity, that is an act of white supremacy and voyeurism. That argument ignores the fact that 5,000 years of Western art, the white nude has been at the absolute center of our artistic tradition. So if it's misogynistic white supremacy to portray a Black, it is even worse for all these artists who have been portraying whites. So the details are even worse than I'm describing, but it just is an example of how irresponsible, criminally negligent these leaders are in giving young people an excuse to recognize and to try to lose themselves in traditions of just extraordinary sublimity and beauty.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that they're lying about these artists' intentions, and they're rewriting history, like, as you said, it's just injustice to our future generations who could have learned from that and grown to love it like all the centuries before us.
Right.
So it's just another important aspect of the war on excellence in America. And again, you do a great job of really laying out all the different facets of the secular, progressive, social justice, critical race theory attack on the culture and the arts. So
I would also say, I mean, with regards to young people, it's clear there's a real spiritual malaise among young people, especially among females today. I mean, they're just walking basket cases.
yeah,
But I would say that in denying young people the possibility of beauty and telling them that everything about the past is something to be ashamed of and to be dismissed and to feel superior over, not allowing children to read books of great wonder, the great classics of the children's literature, the British books, Wind in the Willows, Winnie the Pooh, and substituting instead these just sadistic narratives of dysfunction, the young adult literature. I think that it is stunting young people's ability to have a realm of innocence and a realm of beauty that is leading them to have very unhappy souls. And I'm very grateful that my parents read to me some of the greatest works of children's literature and literature generally that I can retreat to imaginatively. I can go back to the charmingness of children's literature, of all of the Ernest Shepard drawings of Sendak, of E.B. White, Charlotte's Web, and Stuart Little. Those books allowed me to have some zone of childhood that it was apart from the adult world, and we're denying that to children now. And I think the results are, we're seeing them already, and with the self-mutilation, flagellation, castration, it's not a pretty sight.
yeah. No, that's an excellent point. And I loved my fiction growing up as well. And it fed my imagination, my creativity, and my zest for life.
Exactly.
And we're slowly zapping this next generation's happiness, and we're just throwing all this baggage on them. It's really depressing.
Yep.
Which leads me to my final question, which might even be more depressing, is there any hope? Because you have the final anecdote in one of your last chapters. You ask some doctor or scholar somewhere in the field, like, why are you allowing this? This is horrible. Is there any hope? He's like, no. He's like, it's going to have to rot from the inside over the next 50 to 100 years before it self-corrects. And I'm like, oh no, like, this is horrible. I mean, is there any hope? Is there any turning around this ship? Or, as we talked about, is this civilizational suicide?
Well, it's something that all of us can turn around by not being cowed by phony charges of racism. I'm sick of it at this point. There's no way they can silence me. I don't care what you call me. I know the facts. And, this book does give the facts about the academic skills gap and the crime gap that allow you to fight back against the charge that any racial disparity, whether it's underrepresentation of Blacks in meritocratic institutions or overrepresentation of Blacks in prison, is the result of racism. No, it's not. It's a result of skills gap and crime gap. So know those facts, arm yourself. But it's very hard to get people who are worried that they will lose their jobs if they stand up to racial quotas, to racial preferences, to lowering of standards. They have to get the courage to defend the thing that they have spent their lives working for. I would say what I see happening with Ron DeSantis and some other Republican governors is grounds for hope. I mean, DeSantis is doing more than I really would have believed possible in taking on the academic monolith. And he's not being cowed by charges of violations of academic freedom. It turns out, you really can, if you're a governor, tell your public universities no more diversity bureaucracy. The diversity bureaucracy is based on yet another of these fictions, which is that American universities are racist. They are not. They're preferring Blacks at every possible opportunity. So as you know, Jennifer, I'm a pessimist, and I give into optimism with great reluctance. It rubs me the wrong way, but I have to say there are things happening now that I would not have predicted, and maybe they will keep going. And if they do, maybe we do have a chance of turning this around.
Well, that's a great note to end on. And I hope so too. I think you made some great points. DeSantis has shown us there is a way to do it. And I like that anecdote. But like Heather said, arm yourselves with the facts and the data and the knowledge to refute false accusations and ad hominem attacks. You have them all here in that book. It's so well put together. It's so fact-filled. I in my book review, I'll link to it in the College Fix. I said there was hundreds and hundreds. There's probably thousands of just different facts and anecdotes and data that people can use to refute false allegations of racism and stand up for America and stand up for excellence and stand up for greatness. And, you know, maybe save ourselves from a slow, painful death. So thank you so much for your time. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and keep up the great work. You're one of the bravest women in America, I think.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Jennifer. I appreciate it. And I'll accept the woman designation again.
There you go.
I call it an epithet, but I'll take it. Thank you.
Okay, good. All right. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.